Hi, welcome to Quirky Queen's Journals. My name's Kirsten. So today I am doing another simple flowers in a vase sitting on top of a table with a bright tablecloth and some lovely wallpaper. So I'm using the simple graphics from Canva as a guide to really just where to place the flower heads and sort of inspiration on pattern. I am using fluid acrylic paint. So you can see it does a lot of beading on the gel plate and it just gives such wonderful, delicate effects on the final piece. Now I am using a rigor paintbrush, which is normally used with watercolours, but it does help give a lack of control to the paintbrush, which also helps give that delicate effect. So that was burnt sienna and this is phthalo green. Now when I'm doing this as well, this layer that I'm painting just now is what will be at the top of the picture. So later on you will see that I put down colours that look quite heavy, not heavy, as if they take up more of the picture space than they do, but because there's other colours underneath them, they don't show through the same. I was really happy with this actually. I think out of all the ones I've done so far, this is my favourite, and it makes me want to do more and more. I do think using the fluid paints on the gel plate in this way does give a very abstract feel to the final picture that would be hard to achieve if you just did it straight onto the paper, because the lines you're putting down do thin out in places, and then you've got bits that gather in places as well, a bit heavier. So you're not really controlling the sort of, I suppose, the thickness of the line. But these paints do stay wet for a little while. So what happens is when you come in with other colours, there's blending that goes on that you're also not in control of. I mean, you are to an extent, depending on where you put it. But overall, the lines just merge into each other, but they still stay separate. It's not like it turns muddy. So I'm adding in some yellow here. And because that green's still wet, they will just kind of blend together. But when these paints dry, when I put other layers on top of them, these layers are still going to be at the forefront of the picture. It'll make sense. I loved it. I loved doing this. I loved the mystery of it, because the lines that you're putting down do change. So when you go back to it, you're like, oh, I've created lines and shapes that I wouldn't have been able to create without these three items: the gel plate, the rigor paintbrush, and the fluid acrylic paints. And I have to say that I absolutely love it. It's making me want to get out the watercolours and see how they would behave. But I think that the fluid paints, although there's beading, they do still stay to an extent. I think the watercolours would bead completely. And also, they also reactivate when they're wet. So if you went over it with a different layer, you would be reactivating what's underneath. So I'm not sure. It's worth a go. I'll give it a shot at some point. Earlier when I said that the colours blend together, they don't blend together completely. What happens is you get lots of variations between the colours. So without much effort on your part, you're creating lots of variety within that one plant stock. I hope that makes sense. It makes sense to me. kind of. No, it does. So this, I know it looks like I'm spending a lot of time on this part here, but this is the most important part of the whole picture. It's the live flowers. So I have added in some of the green yellow onto this vase, and this was a bit of an error because my intention was, I don't know, I think I wanted to use up the paint and I thought it would be more yellow than it was. I do like to, when I'm doing paintings on the kind of underpainting parts, you know, the earlier layers, I do like to take colours from other places and add them in, so it just gives a bit of subtle cohesion that's not obvious. But with the gel plate, when they dry in, nothing comes through them. So even though at this side they're covered over, when it's added onto the paper, they're not. So what I did was, I do check the other side of the gel plate fairly regular. And then later on, I just peeled those little bits off because I feel that there was too much of it and it was too similar to the plant colour. And you're taking a live item and then putting too much of it onto the inanimate object. That's my thought process on it. And it does look a bit Christmassy here, but it doesn't last. That is pyrrole red, which is like fire engine red. It's like nail varnish red. So I do show you when I peel the little green bits on the vase back off. I just scrape them and then I add some white in. So this is the flower heads. That pink colour is pyrrole red, white, and a bit of the kind of phthalo green, yellow and burnt sienna added in as well. It's a bit more of a muted pink colour. It's not the nicest pink colour, but it's a bit more natural looking. That's the word. What I liked about this is when I put on the third flower head, it goes over the stalks. This painting has been dried after I did the vase and the stalks before I started the flower heads. So when I've done the flower head over the dry green stalks, in the final picture, you've got all those lovely stalks over it and it just looks so natural. It looks like the way that a vase of flowers would look. And I think that's really quite a hard thing to recreate directly on the paper. And just the way the gel plate works, you know, that enabled me to do that quite easily. I didn't start out with the intention of doing it that way because actually in the picture that I was using as a reference, all the flower heads were seen fully. They weren't covered by the stalks. But that was a nice surprise at the end when I realised that the one on the left had been covered. I noticed that this paint is staying on a bit better than the vase and the plant stalks paint did. And I think it's because my paintbrush is probably a bit drier, and also going over paint that's already there but dried gives it something to cling on to. This is a kind of orangey colour now. You can still see some beading going on though. I like the way that rigor brush makes the flower heads. I don't think that I would have had the petals looking so... There's a lot of movement. Not movement. The shape that the flower heads actually make I think the rigor brush helped create that. You know, the delicate kind of natural curve that they have. So the rigor brush just has a very long brush head, a long thin brush head. So this is quinacridone magenta. Again, just adding that into the plant pot. I'll add a bit into the flower heads. So you can see there the flower heads, it looks like they're mostly yellow now, but on the other side, it's not like that. There's just little hints of the yellow. I want to get a massive gel plate the size of a large canvas, like an 80 by 60, and do a massive print on it like this, and then transfer it onto a canvas. I think that would be magical. I suppose that's what professional printmakers do, that sort of, they work at that sort of scale, don't they? I like that the vase and the flowers are starting to separate in their colours now, even though they actually contain the same paints. The vase is starting to look like, you know, the mosaic vase where lots of coloured kind of stones have been put on, glued onto the vase or whatever, or made from that, however they make it. So that's me just having a check. I really should have put more of the checks in the video, but I didn't. Yeah, it would have been helpful to you guys, but I'll know for next time. So I've obviously realised that yellow's not really shown through at all. That's okay. However it ends up is fine. So the pink and the yellow, I'm kind of using them as complementary colours, but also making a more neutral colour with them. I know it's pink, but it's a purpley pink. So again, this had been dried, and I'm adding in the top. It's quite nice as well, the different effects you can get using it wet on wet, but also wet on dry. And it adds variety doing it backwards, because there is a little bit of the unknown. You're giving up a lot of control doing it this way. I like we've added the yellow into the vase, but in a different way. So it's subtle. This is the tablecloth now. I just did a stripy tablecloth because that's kind of what was easiest to do with the paints, because I'm not overly experienced with these fluid acrylic paints. I've only used them a few times, and also the vase is quite intricate, so I wanted something, you know, I didn't want, although I want them clashing pattern wise, they also need to work together. So a plainer design on the tablecloth, using all the colours that I've used already, felt like the way to go. I think I could have added more in though, because at the end there's quite a lot of gaps in the tablecloth. Maybe a couple more layers would have just been enough, but it still worked out fine. I was still really happy with it. Do you see the way it beads? So you put down a line and then it just becomes this organic shape. The lines create edges to themselves that, you know, I wouldn't be able to create just using paint on paper. I like the fact I've got all the colours of the rainbow in here as well, and it still looks, overall at the end, it's still really natural. It is important you give this painting drying time though in between, because you want both effects. You want the wet on wet and the wet on dry, because if you just keep doing the wet on wet, you won't end up with a definition. They will just leak into each other. Do you know, I think adding that blue in just, I don't know, it just helped elevate it a wee bit. It's just so much more interesting to look at now. This was a mistake because that yellow hadn't dried completely and I've made green. These things happen. I end up dabbing it out. You can just dab them out with a little dry paintbrush or a cotton bud or a bit of tissue or, you know, a cloth, whatever. Again, just kept this wallpaper simple. I'm trying to be conscious as well about using a variety of brushes, because changing your brushes up makes a difference as well. Like, you seen the way the rigor behaved at the beginning with the plants, and then that bigger brush there, you know, the stripes, the vertical stripes in the wallpaper are different to the stripes on the tablecloth. And it's not just because they're thicker. The beading behaves differently. Basically, the more things you can use to add variety to it, the better, the more interesting it is, the more effects you'll get, the more you'll discover about what you like and what makes things work really well. It's also easier to add the background on on the gel plate using these fluid acrylics, because if you can see I went over the plant stalks with some of the paler blue, and that's because it won't show through, but I'm able to get into those tiny little gaps doing that. Whereas if I was painting it directly on paper, I maybe wouldn't be as tidy with those gaps. So I'm letting the layers dry for about 30 to 60 minutes in between times. I was just distorting the stripes a bit there at the plant pot to make to represent a sort of shadow. I'm not sure how much it worked, but I thought I would give it a try. So this is me taking off the green bits on the vase. Not all of them. I'm just making them smaller. That is a scoring tool. Now, I got 3 of these for £2 in the range, and they've got tiny little balls on the end. So that is a blunt. Even though it doesn't look blunt, it is blunt. So I'm not like scratching at the gel plate or anything. We're nearly done. I think this is the last bit actually. I think I had some white onto the stripes on the wallpaper as well. And then we get to the exciting part. I'm also going to try another one of these plant still life type paintings. Can you call it a still life when you've not actually used a still life to paint from. Anyway, I'm going to use it with normal heavy body acrylic paint and see how that goes. I'm doing all the mixed medias separate. So, you know, I've done the alcohol markers, I've done the acrylic pens, I've done the fluid acrylics, and I'm going to try the heavy body acrylics next. Part of my problem is when I've got leftover paint, I can't let it go to waste and I need to add it into the picture somewhere, and I need to stop doing that. No, I think adding the yellow in there was good because it separates it more from the wallpaper. So this is dry, and that's my makeshift registration plate from the beginners video that I made. When I say beginners video, it's how I approached it. So this is gold heavy body acrylic paint to pull it off with, and I'm putting it into my concertina sketchbook with the rest of them. So it's a bit fiddly putting it on, but it's worth it. This is A5, by the way. It's an A5 plate. Well, it's smaller than A5, but it gives a nice border round your A5 paper. And then I'm attempting to lift it over. That's baby oil on my registration paper. I use that on the plate to just try and keep it soft. So now we wait. This did not take long, but see, because there was quite a lot of layers of the fluid paints, you have to be quite delicate when you're taking it off. I wouldn't just yank it off in one kind of swoop. There's almost like strips of paint, patches of it, and you want it to... There's a bit here you'll see at the top of the plant pot. See there? So that's came off there and it's stuck to the plate, the gel plate, so I'm just pressing it back on. Whereas if I'd pulled that off fast, then I would have lost that. And it's quite a gap it actually had made. And there we go. I'm really happy with this. It turned out much better than I hoped for. The tablecloth, I would have liked if I'd done a couple more layers because I feel that there's a bit too much gold showing through. But apart from that, I wouldn't change anything of it. And here it is. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. And I hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.